plant. So Ellen, thank you again so much for being here and welcome.
That's what I'm here to chat about today. For one thing, it will turn you into a fervent conservationist, because having butterflies or not in your garden is really, it's an issue of what are the health of our general environment, both in our gardens, but also in all the wild areas around where we live. But for me, you know, what really got me addicted at the beginning is they're just beautiful. You know, they don't hurt anybody. You know, they can land on your head and it's not going to be a problem. They're benign. They add color, beauty, and grace. Also motion, and super fun to watch when they're fluttering around. And enjoying learning about our native butterfly fauna, or yours, wherever you are in Texas there, will help you better understand the issues of environmental change, especially change due to climate changes, and also conservation of our native landscapes. So what makes butterflies different from other insects? Their wings have scales, and that is partly where the name comes from, the order Lepidoptera. Lepido means scaly. I think this is in Greek. And ptera means wing. So they're scaly winged, and they have those little overlapping scales that look like shingles on a roof. And I previously gave a talk on pollinators that in September, I believe it's online, and can tell us at the end. But that one focused more on bees, because bees are actual more important crop pollinators, as well as being better designed to be super efficient movers of pollen because they're so hairy. So butterflies are different in that they're minor pollinators. They're not really major pollinators of crops or anything like that. But like the bees, they also undergo complete metamorphosis. And usually most of us learn this in elementary school, and then we go, yeah, eggs, larva, pupa, butterfly. And then you don't, like for me anyway, yeah, I knew that, but I didn't really think about it until I started working on this talk. How it makes a difference in how we learn about them and how we manage for them. So only the adults of butterflies are flower visitors. And that means pollinators, meaning that they act to move pollen. The adults are mostly nectar eaters, although they do eat a few other things, and I'll talk about that in a bit. The larva, or the other life form that we see the most, the caterpillars, those eat plants. So we have caterpillars that need plants, and we have adults that need to visit flowers. So these 4 life stages have different environmental requirements. And there's also different hazards for each of the life stages. The biggest one, of course, is that other creatures out there can use them for fuel and protein. And so they're always in danger of being eaten or parasitized. In the egg, as the adult who needs to lay the egg needs to find a host plant that caterpillar will be able to eat. So those right host plants have to be the stage. For the larva, the egg has to have been laid on the host plant, but also there needs to be enough of the plant, either a big enough plant or many plants, so that it can provide the caterpillar enough food to grow to maturity. The pupal stage, which we hardly ever think about, except for sometimes when I'm pruning, I'll find something in a little cocoon and I'll like poke around trying to figure out what it is. But the pupils, they need a protected place. They want to go away from their predators and hide where they can't be seen and eaten. And so they need a protected place to pupate and develop. And then of course the adults that are primarily nectar eaters, they need the nectar for flying. And that means flowers. They also need salts and mineral nutrition, and I'll show you how to get that in a minute. But butterflies, compared to bees, which was what the last lecture was mostly about, butterflies do not nest. They don't make a little nest in the ground and then lay the eggs, you know, together where they all are in a row or anything. And instead they overwinter, which means they survive what we're going through right now with cold and rain, in a number of different ways. And different species of butterflies do this in different ways. And that's kind of what makes butterfly gardening super interesting, because every species is going to have slightly different needs, whereas we want to get as many as we can. So it means we have to create a complicated environment, a more complex environment. And on the first top left, that photo is a hairstreak, gray hairstreak. That and the coppers, which is another category of butterfly, they overwinter as an egg. So the egg goes into a stasis or a diapause, and it waits for the bad weather before it emerges. The sulfurs, which is the top right, they overwinter as larvae. The bottom, just below the sulfur, is a cabbage white or European cabbage worm. The whites and the oranges that are related in the same group, they overwinter as pupa, and the iconic monarchs, they overwinter in California as adults. So what about migration? Migration is another way for avoiding winter. And the two butterflies, which are the main migrating ones that we can see in our gardens, hopefully, are the monarchs. And there are two populations of monarchs. One is on this side of the Rocky Mountain, and the other one is on the east side of the Rocky Mountains. And the populations that are on our side, they migrate up and down in elevation and north to south. And this they migrate in the area near Central California from south to west to the coast, where they can be protected in evergreen trees. Another interesting migrator is the painted lady. And these migrate to Central California, where we are, near Sacramento, where I am, near Sacramento, from the desert in late winter and early spring. And in 1919, we had a really cool thing happening where they were like little bullets, and they were like all outside, and they were just zooming by. Every minute you'd see another one or two or three, and they were going up and down and over stuff, and it was just like little bullets flying through the air. And I had some plants that captured their attention, and so I got to take some videos of them on that. The picture you see on the bottom on it, it's a Spanish bluebell. So butterflies are very seasonal. So they have their life cycle is strongly seasonal. They start off, the numbers of butterflies will start off very scarce in spring. So when it first warms up, the first one you always see is the cabbage, the European cabbage worm. And because it's just a really super prolific creature that is also a pest on agricultural crops. And so they start off scarce in spring. But slowly as it warms and the season continues and the plants start to bloom, you'll start seeing more butterflies emerging with the warmer weather. Then they will lay eggs, the ones that have multiple generations. That second generation will be pupae, go through the whole cycle, and you'll have multiple generations at the same time. So what happens is by September and October is peak butterfly season. And these are two garden pictures in fall and some of the plants that you might see in fall. And it's a little harder to find fall blooming plants to pick, but we'll show you some later on. So the butterflies that you're going to see in your garden or in surrounding native landscape or in your fields by your house is going to depend on a couple of things. One is in ecosystem studies, they found that the connectivity, it's called, of your habitat to surrounding landscapes. In other words, how close you are to the natural landscapes in the natural areas or wild areas where the host plants are. And then also what people in the gardens around you are growing. And I like this because I think if this really catches on and everybody starts doing it, then we can create these habitats, these areas of habitat by having connectivity between the gardens. The other thing is that the characters of the butterfly species itself, it is what's called polyphagy, which is how many different plants is that larva able to eat, or will it eat? So how wide a diet the butterfly species has. So there are butterflies that are generalists, like I showed you the gray hairstreak that eats lots of different kinds of plants. And then I'm going to show you some that will only eat one kind of plant. So that's called polyphagy versus monophagy. And then some butterflies don't travel. Like, while some migrate vast distances, like the monarch, Some, like the little blues in the South Central Valley in the Bay Area, they often will move only a few feet, if at all. So it's very species dependent on how their behaviors are. But the quality of the garden that you create and the surrounding habitat is critical. And this is what's going to determine the abundance of butterflies that your garden catch. Like, I think of it as like you're catching them. You're putting out stuff and they're cruising around and then they go, oh, that looks good, and down they come. But also the management of your landscape as a resource is important. We'll talk about that a little bit. But basically the abundance is determined by food availability. And with a butterfly, that means host plants. This was a quote that I read in this book, Butterfly Gardening. Miriam Rothschild, who's a famous entomologist in England. She said, the best you can do is provide them a good pub. And I like that, where like you're just putting out the food and the drink and then you wait and see what happens. Because the abundance is determined by food availability. If you have host plants, but there's no nectar, you won't see the adults because they'll go somewhere else. So if you want to see any of your own butterflies that you might be raising, as well as the ones that are coming in from outside, you need to have nectar, plenty of nectar. I already said that. Okay, this is the first poll, and we didn't really practice how we were going to do the polls. Oh, here we go.
Hey, Ellen. Okay, we're going to start our poll here, and it looks like a couple people have already started voting. So you didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz, but we're wondering if you can recall how many life stages butterflies have and peak butterfly season. So we'll give everybody just a couple more seconds here to vote, and then we will go ahead and end the poll and announce the results. Okay, so we're going to share the results, and it looks like 75% of people said 4 life stages, Ellen.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. And when is peak butterfly season? 88% got September and October, so great job.
Okay. Also now, if you have time, if you want, you can type your questions into the Q&A. And that way you won't forget them later. Sometimes I write them on a piece of paper, but you can also
I didn't see any in the Q&A, and I don't see anything in the chat. What happened, Ellen, was I think because of the storm, there's been a lot of interference, and once in a while you would cut out a tiny bit, but a couple people noticed it more. So we'll just carry on. I think that might have distracted some folks, but we will go ahead and have you keep going. And then remember, if you have a question for Ellen, to go ahead and type that in the Q&A. All right.
So how do you manage your landscape for butterflies? Well, you want to have lots of different kinds of plants, a diversity of plants. If you can, try to get some host plants. We're going to talk about host plants a little bit more. And I'll tell you which ones I've been super effective with getting egg laying and larvae and adults in my yard. One thing to people that are really careful gardeners and they like everything really neat that they forget about is that the creatures need places for hibernation, for getting through the winter and surviving that cold. And that means it should be undisturbed areas, things that you don't always clean up all the way. Also, insects are super sensitive to chemicals, to pesticides. They have delicate constitutions, and you want to keep your landscape free. Leaving the leaves is how this, I've seen in recent writing, people talking more and more about these overwintering areas and leaving areas undisturbed. And it's not just the butterflies that benefit from that. There's other kinds of insects that will also use it. And it includes things in your yard like leaf litter, very dense vegetation where you don't, chop everything all the way to the ground. One thing I've started doing is leaving my perennials and not cutting them until later in the winter or until they fall over, start to fall over on their own. and that requires special plant selection, but that way I leave those overwintering sites if there's insects in the stems. And then also tree cavities, piles of rocks, if you happen to live near caves, all of those things could provide them with overwintering sites. Also, if you can leave muddy puddles for sipping and extracting nutrients, this is a picture of a common sulfur butterfly, which is everywhere up and down the West. And what they do when they're puddling is they can use the minerals that have dissolved in the water, in the moisture, and then they can extract the moisture and the nutrients to continue their flight. So if you want to improve your butterfly abundance, you want to increase the number of host plant species and grow host and nectar plants in large patches. This is a design component that's the same with bees. It allows the insect to go to one area and then get a lot of resources without having to use a bunch of the energy to go to the next area. So it allows them to get more food faster and more efficiently. Also, if you live in an area that has slopes, which is not that common in Davis, the slope will create microclimates, and that will have an effect on your average temperatures, how much moisture there is, and also the suitability of habitat. So you want to, when you're planting your garden, you want to look at that, where you're putting it, and where it's going to face. And that's because butterflies prefer these sunny open areas, often flat, sunny open areas, but also hilly. And they need the warmth and rocks to sit on, because in the early morning, in the early season and late season, when it's not hot at night, they need to sit in the sunshine to warm up their wings for flight. So the weird thing, when you start to learn about the native butterflies, and I've been focusing, of course, on where I live, and I believe, and I checked the list, we share a lot with Stanislaus County. We have the same, you have the same on your butterfly list, and there's as I have in this slideshow. So at the end, there'll be a reference to that so that you'll be able to find that. It'll be part of your printout. The butterflies we're in the Central Valley have adapted to our modified non-native landscapes. And that's because there was this has been a vast transformation of what was native here before European settlers came and what there is now. And this is due to clearing for agriculture, to build roads, to build cities. And so the food sources they used to have got way reduced. And for the butterflies to survive, they had to adapt to what came in its place. What came in its place are what we call weeds. They're plants we don't necessarily want, but they have the characteristics of chemicals and nectar and time of bloom that provides resources to the butterflies. So it's kind of hard, because when you look at the host plant list, there's like a lot of nasty weeds. And I'll talk about one in a bit that I've been experimenting with, which ones you can leave, which ones you can't. So some considerations for plant selection and design is that you want to try to always have as many native plants as you can. And I'm a big proponent of starting with what you've got and then shifting to a lower water regime. If you have high water plants, you really want to keep them. You need to move them somewhere where you're going to have a special high water section, and then shift over to low infrequent irrigation, medium low to low, and put in and mix in with the plants that are non-native that you already have, new native ones that can coexist. And actually, we've created some really nice gardens at the Arboretum over the years using that technique. You want to plant in masses using 3 foot, 36 inches, a yard in diameter areas of bloom. Again, for what I talked about earlier, saving the insects having to use the energy for flight as much. Include some grasses. It's not only makes it more attractive, but it also provides overwintering sites and host plants for some butterflies. And try to have some plants that bloom in the spring, some that bloom in the summer, and some that bloom in the fall. When you go to a nursery and you're selecting plants, you're looking at what they have, ask your growers if they use I can never say this, neonicotinoids, which is a special kind of pesticide that's absorbed into the plant and then can get into the nectar and pollen and retain toxicity. So you don't want to use any plants from that. And also, although a lot of ornamental plants like roses, I always use roses as an example, they're highly hybridized. And in the process of hybridization, sometimes the floral parts that have the nectar and have the pollen are converted into petals through the hybridization. So they no longer have as much food resource. They don't provide as good a resource. One example of that not being the case is some of these single petaled roses, which I tend to favor. They're the more wild type. And you can see they still have what looks like all of their flower parts. Some of the butterflies are introduced. We talked about the European cabbage butterfly. This butterfly eats a wide variety of crops and weeds in the cabbage family. One of the books I read recommended everybody plant out a patch of arugula and just share it with them because all of these, whether they're pests to us or not, still provide food sources for wild birds. And the birds really need that high protein of caterpillar larvae to raise their chicks. It's super common, it's super fun, and it's one where when I was first starting out and telling people about, gardening for wildlife and gardening for butterflies, when they came to visit me, one woman said, "You do have a lot of butterflies." And it was mostly that they were those cabbage whites with a few other ones in there, but she was still impressed. Some butterfly species have adapted to eat both native and non-native plants. And these are the most successful ones. These are the ones that we're going to see, the majority of the ones I'm going to show you photos of. One of them is the orange sulfur or alfalfa butterfly. It's one of the most abundant. It's very lovely. It can eat alfalfa. So if they grow alfalfa in your area, you're going to have some of these, hopefully. But they also eat a lot of native plants in the legume family. And I have a picture there of deerweed, which is, there are a couple of different native lotus. What flowers attract butterflies? They have to have nectar. And so it helps to observe in your garden, but there are also nectar providing lists, plants that provide flowers that have nectar lists online that you could research. Because they have to have nectar, they have to have nectar because the only way that adult butterflies can get nectar is through their long proboscis, which is a tube, and they have to sip up the nectar that they use for fuel. But an exception to this, and I mentioned that earlier, is also butterflies will land on dung, rotting fruit, sap, and then if there's aphids leaving a lot of honeydew, they may feed on the honeydew. And there are some recipes around, and I didn't include them because I haven't tried them yet, like rotting bananas and stuff like that. You can make a little butterfly attracting trap and set the food on it. In my area, the problem is the squirrels would eat it all before any butterfly ever got it. So, okay, here's some more questions. Poll 2.
All right, let's get ready for our next poll here. Okay, is everybody ready? What management practices are good for butterflies? We'll give you a couple seconds to answer this. And Ellen, in the meantime, we have a question or two. Denise said that she is always concerned about leaving butterflies petals because mosquitoes also like them. Do you have a suggestion about that?
Well, you want to not leave it full of water. You don't want to have standing water. You want to take like a saucer or like something you would put under a plant or a shallow dish and put it in the ground, fill it with sand, and then moisten the sand. And that way you don't have actual standing liquid water. What you have is moist sand. And in our area, if you overfill it and make it a puddle, even then, in the summer, by June, July, it's completely evaporated by the end of the day. And so the mosquitoes couldn't survive it. It's different from a bird bath, which, you have standing water. It's more moist sand and minerals that are mixed together.
Thanks, Ellen. Okay, we're going to share the results, and it looks like pretty much 100% on this quiz. Everybody knows to leave leaves and piles for overwintering sites. So awesome.
Okay.
And so question-wise, Claudia asks, what do they eat from these dung puddles?
From the dung, the butterflies that land on dung, while it's moist, they can use their proboscis to any nutritious minerals that are in that's been excreted by the animal. There still are going to be minerals in there, and they can, as long as they're in solution, they can just sip them up off the moist dung. It's gross to see. You're like, ew.
Hey, we eat gross things too, right? Okay, maybe not that gross. And then Heidi wanted to know if genetically modified alfalfa affects butterflies.
I do not know.
Yeah, it might.
What's it genetically modified for? Do you know? If it's anti-Lepidoptera, if it's got Bacillus thuringiensis, then it will kill off the sulfur butterflies.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Okay. And then one person said they live in, Lorena said her garden is shaded. Is there anything she can do? And what can she plant to attract butterflies? Because you did mention, Ellen, that butterflies prefer sunny, open areas.
Yeah, it's there is not a lot of information on, there are some butterflies that are forest dwellers, but you have to be near native forests. So for somebody in an urban area or a, big suburban area, that's tough. Let me think, what do I have in my backyard? What do I have in the shade? Erigeron, which is a seaside daisy, will grow, California daisy that the butterflies have visited, and that grows in some part shade in my front yard, but not really dark shade. If it's really dark, you'd probably need to thin the tree to let more light in, or thin the branches on whatever it's shading it.
And I think we'll take time for one more question, and then we better move on. Wendy wanted to know, she said, you mentioned butterflies like rotting fruit. Should she leave the fruit longer in the butterfly habitat when we grow them? So it sounds like she might be doing maybe a project where she's growing or has a butterfly habitat. Should she change the fruit daily, or should she leave it?
Once it's dry, they can't get anything from it. So you can throw it away when it's dry. The other thing that makes me think of, though, is like if you have persimmons and stuff and they drop fruit all over the ground, it makes me wonder if maybe some of those, as they start to rot, or like apples, that maybe butterflies would visit them. I don't have either of those plants in my own yard, so it's just a question. It's the first time I've ever really thought about it, whether having fruit trees are a really good thing for butterflies if there's some stuff that falls on the ground.
Yeah.
Most of the recipes call for super high sugar fruits, like bananas. If you go online and say, rotting fruit recipe for butterflies, you'll see some on, I think there's a couple on there, and they do things like they take a banana and they mash it up with leavening, that makes the stuff that makes yeast, stuff that makes bread rise. And the yeast has a lot of good nutrition in it. And then they added something else. So they have these recipes of things you can put out. Maybe you could put them in a little bowl.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's, as far as I know, I would say the ornamental plants that are not edible fruits are probably not going to be mushy enough. Whereas the other stuff, if you let it fall and rot, then it would be.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
that's
great.
The technical term, mushy.
Mushy. All right, we'll save the rest. We have a couple more questions, but let's just save them and go ahead and keep going, Ellen.
So some butterflies you'll only see if you're near native habitat. And this is one of the reasons why butterfly gardeners become naturalists and conservationists, is once you're out there and you realize, oh, some butterflies only eat oak trees, native oak trees. So if I don't have any native oak trees, I'm not in my area, I'm not going to see certain butterflies. And riparian areas, which are vastly diminished in the Central Valley, you know, they're just a mere fraction of what they once were. And so the ones that are left really need to be protected, as well as marshlands and tule marsh. And, you know, some of the best land is for agriculture is converted tule marsh, where the soils are super great, and the water's been sent away, and so they're no longer swampy. And that's just part of our conversion. So I'm going to just show you some butterflies. Hopefully it won't give you my eyes glaze over too much. I put these together because they look so much alike and because they're actually related. The one on the left is a Lorquin's Admiral. Lorquin was one of the very first butterfly documenters in our area in California. And he did the first butterfly flora. And that's why a lot of butterflies have that in it in their name. It was once common, and now it's very scarce and local. It eats willows. So you can see that, you know, as we drain the wetlands, we don't have fewer, and we don't have as many riparian areas, we're going to have a lot fewer willows. Its relative on the right is the California sister. This is the emblem of the California Naturalist Program. And the undersides are very beautiful. I'll show you a picture of the bottom and another side. But these are the ones that are likely to visit sap and bruised fruit, roadkill, things like that. But the larvae eat oaks, and they like the new soft spring growth. So the more oaks you have, more native oaks you have around you, the more likely you'll see the butterfly. These are good sized butterflies. I kind of did them by size, largest to smallest. The swallowtails are the ones I always want to have. The one on the top is the California the Pipevine swallowtail, which if you get the light just right, which I was lucky in this picture to get the angle of the light just right, the bottom wings reflect this beautiful blue, which always makes me think of tropical butterflies. And it is native, the plant, the host plant is native in riparian areas. So it's seen naturally along waterways in places like along the Cosumnes River, along Puda Creek in our area. You would commonly see these because the pipevine would be growing in areas there. You can grow California pipevine in the garden. I've seen some beautiful pipevine plants, and it's super interesting. It has super interesting flowers, but I have not seen it with larvae, with caterpillars on it, away from the natural habitat. So in Davis, I'm like a mile. I have a plant, and I'm like a mile from the riparian area, and I don't see them. So they don't seem to come into the urban areas much. But if you live near a creek, if you plant one, you'll probably get them. The people in Davis that live out on Puda Creek, they have thousands of them in their yards. Also, the bottom right is the tiger swallowtail, western tiger swallowtail. It's a very large, very pretty butterfly, and it's actually a very common, for us, relatively common urban butterfly here, and that's because the larval food plant is sycamores and ash, which are commonly used street trees. So in urban areas, there's a possibility that if we converted more of our street trees to certain native species, as well as related non-natives that might be adaptable, that we could help increase and maintain the population of this beautiful butterfly. And they also eat poplars, and salix is willows. Poplars, the problem with poplars is they can often be very invasive, and lots of people are having a problem with that now, where they spread by underground roots. So this is an example of a butterfly that's considered monophagous. It only eats Aristolochia californica in our area. So if there's no Aristolochia, this butterfly is not going to be there. In other areas, it is spread across all the south part of the US, and in those areas, there's other species of native Aristolochia that it does eat. But it's super fascinating, has these crazy little pipevine flowers, usually before it leaves out in winter and early spring, and then has these little road warrior looking caterpillars that are, this is a pretty mature one, probably getting ready to pupate. It's really big, with those big orange spikes, which I really like. Now this is an Anise Swallowtail, which you can tell from the tiger because there's this solid black, large patch along the forewing here. And the host plant of this is fennel, also anise and native plants that are in the carrot family, like angelica, cow parsnip, Heracleum, and others. 15 years ago, I had these in my yard on my dill, and then since then, nothing. And I don't know if it's because I let my dill plants get too old, or I'm sorry, fennel and dill, either one. So you might try planting some. Fennel is extremely weedy, and it's an incredibly invasive plant along highways and areas left fallow. So you would think there'd be millions of these Anise Swallowtails, but in our area, that doesn't appear to be true. And I don't know about other areas. So that'd be really an interesting thing to find out. If in general, if climate change is having something to do with the fact that we don't see it anymore. The other cool thing about this butterfly is this beautiful caterpillar. If you ever see this and you're annoying, like I'm a younger child in a big family, I like to annoy people. So you take a little stick and you poke the front end, and out come these huge orange stinky things called osmeterium, and it's a warning signal to possible predators to warn them off by emitting this terrible smell. So lady butterflies, there are a number of different kinds that we can see here, and I have struggled, and I still do, to keep them all which one is which and to identify them. The one that does that big migration that I mentioned earlier is the one on the right top. It has all the dots of the same size, and it's just the painted lady, Vanessa Carduus. It's the most common one we have, and most cosmopolitan, because look at all these different kinds of plants it can eat, so it can move around and still find food. The West Coast lady has, although it looks almost the same, has completely different host families, which is super interesting to me. This one is common, and I remember it because on the West Coast, we have brighter colors. And you know, in LA you wear sparkly stuff, and their 4 dots on the hind wing have iridescent blue coloring sparkles on the inside, and that's how I remember West Coast. And they eat things like your hollyhocks and many monophagous weeds. The American lady is a separate species, and you can identify this one by the fact that these bigger, these spots on the outside are different size from the ones on the inside. Also, it has this white spot in what's called the 4-wing cell. These are cells, all these little veinal divisions. But it's the least common, so we don't see that as much. So it's kind of, I was thrilled I even got a photo of it. And this is another separate group of plants, things that are in the Asteraceae, things like I think Naphtalium and Anaphyllus is cudweed, and it eats both weeds and the native plants. And then the bottom is an unusual one that I'm always surprised to see. I've seen it, this was from the Arboretum in Davis, is the red admiral. And it has a very limited food, larva food, mostly spiny nettles like you find out in nature that you want to avoid and you probably don't want in your yard. I think we get it in Davis because we are in proximity to the campus reserve, as well as the Arboretum, which might have some of those plants. And then, but it's here, it's visiting a lilac, so, which is a non-native plant completely. So I thought that was super interesting. But if you want you want something easy to start, try to find a hybrid, passionflower vine that in its parentage has Passiflora incarnata, which is from the southeast, and a lot of the new hybrids do. And this is one, it's called Lavender Lady. And this is a tropical butterfly, which has apparently spread here as people have started planting passionflower, like in the Bay Area and in Southern California. And they're more hardy now because of warming. Our winters haven't been as cold. And so these are weedy butterflies that will move in if you plant passionflower. And my neighbor had a passionflower, and I went over and it was covered. And fortunately for me, I didn't have to have this gigantic passionflower in my yard. All I had to have was a smaller, more contained variety, but I still got the adults on all my flowering plants. So it's a good example of us creating a resource shared area where we both have passion flowers, but hers is really big, but I don't want one that big. But mine still had larvae on it. Not as good as hers because I don't water very much. And I just put this picture and I want you to see the caterpillar. It's hard to get caterpillars for a lot of these to help you with your visual ID. This is on the one in my front yard. It has these black and orange stripes. And these are 2 adults that I assumed are starting to mate. This is my front yard. But what are they doing with those antennae? See how they're together? You never see that, except for this at this point where these 2 were like, hey, let's get to know each other or something. I don't know. Buckeye is a fairly common butterfly. These are beautiful. They're mid-size. We kind of are moving into a little bit smaller size. These are still like 2 inches, 2.5 inches. What they eat are your snapdragons, unfortunately. The native plant Scrophulariacae. Lippia nodiflora, which is a ground covering native, which most people think of as a weed because of its aggressiveness. But it is also used, and there's a new cultivar called, oh geez, I'm not going to remember it. Yeah, I don't know if it, well, anyway, I'll see if I can remember it by the end of this talk. But also weedy plantains, plantago, and Kixia, which is a little snapdragon-y weed. And I have found, I got a Kixia in my front yard last year, and I thought, oh, great, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to see if I can get caterpillars. And the thing, I swear, about a month, it grew 6 feet across. And I got frightened and I pulled it out. And I still feel sorry that I did that. What I need is more shade and then just allow it to kind of peek out from under the shade and just control that part. Also, a woman recently found a caterpillar, and these are these beautiful caterpillars with these blue spiky setae, I think they're called. And this was found on eating a Salvia gregii in Davis, and that was a new host plant listing. This is a Mylitta crescent, which normally would be native on the native thistles, most of which are removed now. And so it feeds on weedy thistles, which most of us do not want in our yard because they'll be everywhere and will take over. And I think we have enough of them in the environment in our urban area that we probably don't need to worry about it. We might get, if we're lucky, we'll get one of these visiting anyway. So the smallest butterflies are the skippers. These are not the smallest, but a large group of small butterflies. The skippers are distinct somewhat from the Lepidoptera, and sometimes they're given their own order. And this is because they have certain characteristics that are different from butterflies. One of which is the way you know it's a skipper. If you look at the antennae, the ends of the antennae are curved and flattened, whereas on most things in the butterfly group have club-shaped tips. And these are extremely common. And if you have flowers, you will have these if you have any nectar flowers at all. And the reason is they eat Bermuda grass. There are species that eat Bermuda grass, but they also eat other kinds of grasses and the native salt grass and other things. And they are all kind of similar, so they're a little hard to tell apart. And I'm still working on that. But they obviously love my lavender. You can see his little, he unfurled his tubular mouth part in there and he's drinking nectar. Here's one getting nectar from a salvia. The common checkered skipper is easy to identify because of the way it has these black and white checks on it. And this eats the weed Malva leprosa. Also will eat your ornamentals sometimes, but it's small enough it doesn't seem to really damage anything. And it's interesting because this is the top and this is the underwing. This is the above area of the wings. And look how different they look from below. And this is just feeding on a really common senecio in my yard. The mournful duskywing is another of the skippers. See that little curved antennae tip? Very common and widespread. They eat oaks, the native oaks, and they eat non-native oaks, apparently, both deciduous and evergreen. And you don't really see this good color unless you get the reflection just right. But I can identify them by their extremely dark, and then they have this white fringe along the base. So poll question 3. How are skippers different?
Okay, we are ready for another poll. And we have launched it. So folks are answering. And we do have a couple more questions for you, but I think we're going to have you answer them right after this, Ellen.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to give people 3, 2, 1. We're going to end the polling. Okay, sharing the results. It looks like 94% of people wrote that skipper butterflies have flattened ends on their antennae that curve. All right, great job. So we have a couple other questions. I think you were going to go to your next slide, which was questions, I hope. So Ellen, Kathy wants to know, the milkweed in her garden is still blooming. Should she cut it back? And if so, how much? And will it regrow? And we don't know what type of milkweed she's referring to. So
ask her to type in the color of the flowers.
Okay. So Kathy, if you could type into the chat if you know the name of your milkweed, or you can tell us the flower colors, that would be great. Stephanie wants to know if there are any butterflies that eat or live on Brugmansia, which I'm assuming is that trumpet flower.
I cannot recall reading about anything. You know, I've been pretty much memorizing Archipero's book on butterflies and reading it over in different parts over and over when I have questions. And I haven't heard of, I don't remember reading any that are in that family, which is Solanaceae, and it's or like tomatoes are in, and deadly nightshade, and it's because the leaves have a lot of really toxic compounds.
That makes sense.
I do know of a few beetles that eat Brugmansia, and so you can sometimes see these little greasy looking black larvae, but I think they're beetle larvae, not butterfly larvae.
Yeah, I think I hadn't heard back from Kathy, but around here, most of our milkweeds are dormant. So she might live in another area or somewhere where it's a little bit warmer.
Well, I'm gonna talk about milkweed in a bit.
Perfect. Okay, so let's just, we'll let that one go. And, oh, this is a good one. Claudia asks how to, well, first she was asking the difference between a butterfly and a moth.
Oh, moths have antennae that are fringed. They don't have a bulb on the end. The antennae are different. Also, moths are mainly nocturnal, although that's not completely true. There are species that do fly during the day. And then moths are more prone because of the great majority of them flying at night. They have enhanced ways to find flowers, like through fragrance, like night fragrant flowers will attract butterflies, and so they have special receptors for those fragrances. It helps them find in the dark, and then also they can see white flowers better, and that's why they always say to plant white flowers in your evening garden, and then the moths will come to it.
Yeah, the other thing she asked about were the aphids on milkweed. So are you going to talk about that when you get to milkweed?
Yeah.
Okay, well, so we'll wait on that one. And let's see. Somebody else was asking, do butterfly boxes with the open slats actually work?
I think I didn't put that in because the answer is no, they do not. Like the butterflies will, the ones that, it has to be one that's going to overwinter as an adult for it to do much. A larva is not going to go in a box, and an egg's not going to get laid in a box. So, and they don't usually pupate like inside something. They would pupate under something, and I think they're meant to trap adult butterflies. So what I have read online is they don't do anything. They're cute.
Okay, and Katie wanted to know if you had suggestions on where to buy plants for larvae and adults. She tried to research it and was really overwhelmed, and it sounded like she was pretty frustrated because sometimes the nurseries don't have what she's looking for. I'm not sure where Katie lives. It may not be around here.
Yeah, my first advice would be to go to your California Native Plant Society sales, because the California Native Plant Society people that are growing these plants, they are teaching themselves and becoming educated about these sorts of things. And so they'll be able to tell you which ones are the best pollinator plants, and then which ones have specific relationships like the milkweed and the monarch and stuff like that. The second place would be any local botanic gardens or public gardens, because they're more prone to have, specialized propagations for plants for these reasons. And I don't work at the Arboretum at Davis anymore, but they always have stuff at their sales. Right now, all their sales are online and you have to pick up, they don't ship. So but hopefully by fall, they'll be open again. Who knows?
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Ellen. I think that is all of the questions for now.
Well, good questions, you guys.
Yeah.
I love this photo because you can kind of see on the wing, there's a little slight blue iridescence right here. It's just so great. This is a common hairstreak, very common, and generally distributed in all kinds of disturbed habitats, empty lots and, after new plants after burns. And what they do is they perch on tall plants. And they have these really cool mobile tails, and they go like, I don't know if you can see my hands, but you go like this with their tails. And so those two little hairy things go up and down like they're antennae. And that with this spot is to distract birds who want to eat them. And often you will see them with a V-shaped chunk bitten right out of the back of there, where the bird thought that was the head. And so they ate the wrong end, and the butterfly escaped. And I just think this is the coolest thing ever. And they do eat turkey mullein, which is a native plant, but also considered a weed, but you can keep it if you have a wilder area or a dry, remote area. The Spanish lotus, which is non-native, and then it eats some of the native lotus. This Lotus persianus has a new name. I didn't get a chance to change that name, but it's called Actispon americanus. Which I hate that. And I have tried to cultivate this Lotus persianus in the Arboretum, but the volunteers thought it was such a weed, they ripped it all out, because a lot of these plants, if you're going to use them, you put one in or two, and then don't let a whole bunch of them go, and then maybe try to get one patch, because otherwise everything will be covered with it. But they also eat cheeseweed, which is a weed, hollyhocks, and different members of the pea family. But this, actually, the plant it's on, is getting nectar from, is a native plant. It's a boraginaceae, there it is again. See, and this is something that grows as a weed here, but it's a native weed and needs to be managed a little bit. And the name is heliotrope. Heliotropis carassivica. So it's like salt heliotrope is the common name. I'm sorry, I don't have that on the screen. But the hosts, and this is a different butterfly from the previous, although you can see they're similar in their strategies for distracting the birds with these little tails. This is an eastern-tailed blue, which is hard to photograph because now we're getting into the really little guys. And so that photograph's not totally 100% focused, I'm sorry, but it's the best I got. And they eat this Lotus persianus, and this is what the flower looks like on that. And also the other kinds of lotus. And this is what, on these blues, there are different colors of this beautiful iridescent blue on the top wing of the wings. So they are really pretty and great additions to your garden. Ackman blue is fairly common here. I think it's because we grow a lot of the perennial buckwheats, or the shrubby buckwheats, so we have big areas of nectar for them to attract them. And then the host plant, it likes prostrate weeds also, and also again that Lotus family. Sorry, and but they'll eat many species of lotus. And the interesting thing is, although this is considered a blue, this is I believe a female. So its upper wings are not blue, they're brown with that beautiful orange. So there's some variability in male and female butterflies. But butterfly bush, in terms of just your regular irrigated garden and you're looking for something to help bring the butterflies in, I don't think you can do better than a butterfly bush. The problem is that Butterfly bushes are now considered weeds, invasives. And I have not found them invasive in Davis because it's so hot. I think it's more, and it gets so dry in the summer. And so if you're growing a dry landscape, they'll survive with some protection from the hot afternoon sun. And also now they come in dwarf sizes. The old ones were all these gigantic 12-foot tall things that required a lot of pruning, but now they have the dwarf sizes and seedless types, and there's many different colors. And this is one of those dwarfs, and there you can see a butterfly on it. So apparently the hybridization on these did not interfere with the production of nectar. And this is another one I photographed butterflies on. I don't have a picture of it that was any good, but and there's some seedless types that we got for trialing, and those were also, one day I saw 5 kinds of butterflies on one of these shrubs. The seedless types don't go out of bloom because they never set seed. So if you cut off the old flowers, they just keep flowering and flowering and flowering. So it's worth experimenting, I think, with some of those, as long as you're not in a super moist area where they could become invasive. Lavenders, you got to have a lavender because it's a real butterfly magnet. This is Goodwin Creek Gray. It's a big thing now. Mine's old. This is in my front yard. It's probably 5 feet across. But there's other ones that are good. Some of them rebloom, some of them don't, and that you could just ask your nurseryman what they have available. And I think you want to stick with these long blooming things like this hybrid Goodwin Creek. And then there are some dwarf, I can't remember the name, sorry, I should have written it down, but there are some other ones that are reblooming. So overall, just thinking about perennial plants that are attracting butterflies, my own personal thing is to use low water plants. We're going to have another drought. It's just a matter of when. You should try to use natives. You got a higher chance of visitation and a higher chance it might be a larval host. You want to provide summer and fall bloom, especially because that's when the butterflies are most abundant. You're most likely to see a variety. And just generally, perennials in the daisy family are good. Asters, this is an aster monk or munch. It always had these buckeyes on it all summer. It blooms a long time. And especially the first year it bloomed a really long time. And this is a solidago with an unidentified blue there, I think. No, I'm not sure. But it's a solidago, and then yarrows are also good. The ones that are big and work more as shrubs rather than as perennial plants that come and go, you can grow these pink buckwheats, the Eriogonum grande. They like pretty good drainage. And then also this very common California buckwheat, Eriogonum fasciculatum, has these little white fists of flowers. And here's one on one of these. It's a little younger. It's still more pink. There's a Buckeye butterfly there. But these plants are good also because the shrubby buckwheats, I think everybody should have one in a dry area, in a dryish or low water area in their yard, because it'll also bring beneficial insects that will eat your pest insects like predators, like some of these cool big iridescent wasps. And also it brings a lot of the native bees. I had a number of species of native bees on mine last year. Coyote brush is good because it blooms late, so it helps provide nectar for the late butterflies and when the populations are high. And also the clones, it's weedy if you have a female plant. Plants come in male and female, so you want to have a male plant, and the clones that you buy at nurseries are male. And so that's good because they have the nectar, but they won't take over your yard with seedlings. On the bottom right is the coffee berry. That's or spring bloomer, so it'd be for the early butterflies, also good for the native bees. Can be very ornamental. There's some silver-leaved ones that are really beautiful. And will need medium water at the beginning because they age, they get more and more tolerant of low water. And this is the famous button willow, the town of Button Willow is named for in Southern California. This is a wetland plant, needs to be planted along a waterway. You can see it here along the Arboretum waterway. But it does get some of those bigger butterflies like the Western tiger, and some of the other ones, so that's fun. But it does need moisture. So I wanted to talk briefly about milkweeds, and I'm going to check my time. Oops. Okay. Milkweeds not only feed larvae of the monarchs, but also they provide nectar for other insects. So here's one of those beautiful ones we talked about earlier with the orange dots and the tails, the hair streaks. You want to use your larval food plants of milkweed that are from your area if you can. The ones that occur in our area natively here and north of here, I've seen this Asclepias fascicularis, which is the needle leaf one, growing on the edges of roads before they started spraying herbicides and herbiciding out all the road edges. It was pretty common between here and winters. Speciosa still exists in small patches. There's some big patches in the Arboretum. The problem with speciosa is it's gigantic, and it spreads like crazy if it has any moisture at all. And so it needs some control. Both of these get the orange yellow aphid that everybody thinks is so gross, and they are specific to this species, and the aphids don't spread to any of your other plants. They only go on milkweeds, and but they're very unsightly. And then they have honeydew, which then fungi grows on the honeydew, and then it makes black spots, which are also not attractive. So this speciosa is a little difficult if you had an area in the back. And that's why I say, hey, may spread or need placement out of view. You want to put it behind as a habitat plant, but not where you'd have to look at, where it might gross you out, how ugly it could possibly look. And the bottom right is this Asclepias cordifolia. It's hard to find, and I only put it in because I actually had a picture because I saw it hiking. So I don't have any cultural information except that every place I've seen it, it's on a rocky slope. So it's possible that that one might in the valley might need like a rock planting like you would do if you were making a rock garden. Okay.
All right, we're launching our next poll. Click which of the following attract butterflies or all of the above. We'll give people a couple more seconds. And then we do have another question or two for you. Ellen, somebody asked, is putting a bird feeder outside working against trying to attract butterflies? Will the birds just eat them?
It's jungle out there. It's survival of the fittest. So yes, and they'll eat your caterpillars too, but then they can raise their baby birds. So it's evolution in action. You're becoming a scientific laboratory where the forces of nature can play out.
I think I read somewhere that baby birds need, I don't know, like 200 caterpillars a day. I mean, it's like an insane amount of bugs that they're being fed. So if you don't want them to eat that. So it looks
that's
like
why.
Oh, go ahead.
No, that's why, like with the cabbage worm, cabbage butterfly, people are like, oh, I gotta spray or whatever. I'm like, no, just share your broccoli with them, plant an extra one for them. And then if you have to pick them off, pick all the caterpillars off and move them over to your bait plant, and just because then the birds will eat the caterpillars. The big tomato hornworms that really eat all your tomatoes, which makes me crazy, that's actually a moth. I take those and I throw them over the fence and feed them to my neighbor's chickens. Because otherwise there's no tomatoes.
Ellen's feeding the chickens.
It makes them very happy.
I bet. Well, Ellen, it looks like most people said all of the above.
Yeah, good.
Very good. Okay. And let's see, did we have any other questions? We do have people from other areas. So all I can tell you, because I've had a couple questions from people from Florida and Southern California, and if you don't live in this area, you'll have to either ask your local master gardener about plants or just visit a local nursery to see what they have. So
and this is like a real up and coming effort in almost all states in terms of restoration, and things like the natural resource conservation districts, that would be a source of
like the Xerxes
information,
Society.
because they're starting to
Mhm.
incorporate all these kinds of things in restoration efforts in all parts of
And
the
when
year.
I send the email out, when the YouTube video is ready, I will put a bunch of different paperwork and links to places that have information for pollinators. So, all right, Ellen, we'll carry on.
Okay, and then I always like to remember, I'm a gardener. I like native plants. I love native plants, but I also want more flowers than I normally get with native plants. So I always mix in them if I just have native plants. So I'm always mixing more flowering things. And the sages, you can grow sage for cooking with, and the flowers of that are going to be great to give nectar. And then all these hybrids on the right here, these are really, some of these are super drought tolerant now. These are new hybrids coming out that are hybrids of the Gregg salvia with the salvia microphylla. And some of these are tough as nails. I grew them with hardly any water this last summer, and they did really well. And this is the non-woody salvias, but it's a perennial, so it comes up every year in my relatively dry front yard. So there are numbers of choices for you to look at. A popular butterfly plant is Lantana camera, which has beautiful flowers, but a lot of the varieties now are dwarf, and there's some pure yellows, and then there's different colors, and it is not clear which ones still have their nectar glands and which ones don't because of this hybridization. The other thing about Lantana camera, in some areas it's considered a weed because it produces a lot of these black fruits. And they grow and it spreads. Also the leaves, if we get cold weather like we just have now, the leaves turn black. So you can have this 4-foot tall, 5-foot wide plant that is black from the cold. And so you have to get out there and it's just going to be more work for you. I think it's probably worth looking into some of the new dwarfs to see if they still are attractive. But this big giant thing, which was in the plant collections over on campus, I got this photo of a Western tiger swallowtail on it, so it obviously was attracting them. Verbena bonariensis, also considered somewhat weedy, but not too bad. Most people, if you're growing dry, if you have a drier landscape, it'll be okay. It's popular. This has a cool little black-tip bumblebee on it. This Verbena lilacina. Somebody had too many beers when they named this one Verbena lilacina de la mina. And has a lot of nectar, and I haven't figured out how to keep it alive for more than about 3 years yet, but I have a feeling it has to do with drainage. Okay, so some of the overarching things to take home: make diverse plant choices for diverse butterfly populations, because what you're trying to do is your garden is going to be like a trap. They're all out there flying around, and if they see what they can recognize, then you'll get them and they'll come and visit. And they need nectar for energy in spring, not so much in winter, but in spring, summer, and fall. Make sure you distribute your bloom over the seasons. You have a longer supply period. And I just tossed this in at the last minute. It doesn't really have anything to do with butterflies, but make sure that your native plants and the other plants you're combining with them are water compatible and they share the same water needs. And you can get this information. And in the references, I believe I put a link to Wuckel's Water Use Classification of Landscape Species. So that'll be the end of the slideshow. In our area, lupins, these are two that are native right here. Lupina succulentus with another black tip female gathering pollen. And this is a beautiful large silver bush lupin, which is native in the foothills. I'm sorry, I keep doing that, near us. And this is it in full bloom last year in early spring. You can see it's still raining a little bit. It's just a beautiful thing. This can be managed. They usually live 3 to 5 years, and then they will seed, but not a lot. There's a few annuals worth, I think, growing for butterflies. One is zinnias, because they do well here. You can plant a patch of them. You'll have a long season of flowering, and you can do cut flowers. This is also a tithonia, which is a Mexican daisy with red flowers, and it's very popular with butterflies. So winding up, why plant for butterflies? And in Art Shapiro's book, he says, there's no doubt that habitat loss and fragmentation are the biggest known threats to butterflies. So we can help by creating habitat, by providing the food, the overwintering sites, the moisture for butterflies in our gardens. We create habitat. If you put that in your garden, you can help build links between natural areas. A stand of milkweed will not only hopefully catch a passing monarch, although the monarchs are in decline, but that's another talk. But it'll also attract a lot of other kind of visitors. So it acts as a nectar trapping plant. Focus on adding a few, just start out slow, see which ones you like, just look to your local sources, see what you can find. And what you do by doing that, and what I found by doing in my front yard is like, I had most of these photos that you've seen, I took in my front yard or in the Arboretum. So it's all like super right here, plants that are attracting things. And also you can teach your grandchildren, your children, whoever, then you can explain to them all the complexity of what's going on, and they can begin their environmental education as well. And by doing that, you make a small contribution to the continued existence of the butterfly's small splendor. And let's promote butterfly highways along roadways, all kinds of highway plantings, any country, no stopping the complete herbiciding of all flora, and instead replace it with native plants. These are just two references. Almost everything I've learned, or much of what I've learned, is from Art Shapiro's book, which is also all the same information that's on his website, which is here. And then Anne has a lovely article that's on the Stanislaus website here. And here's the link for the woot calls. And I'm sorry, I couldn't get that one to light up. I don't know why. Okay, and wild creatures will thank you. Here's the list of references, the books that I read, parts of that I included, and a couple of research papers where I got some of the information about connectivity.
Okay, we've got our last poll I'm launching right now. And then we are going to be hearing from our local Stanislaus County librarian, Diane, in just a few moments about how you can access some of these books. And in the meantime, I'll give people a couple more seconds to answer what steps they can take to bring butterflies to their garden. And it looks like this one's kind of a no-brainer. All of the above: plant milkweed, leave piles of rocks and sticks, select nectar-rich flowering plants. Excellent. We did have a couple more questions here about trimming milkweed. What do you want to tell people about?
And when they do that, what happens is there's a disease, a fungal disease that builds up in the populations of those monarchs that are the ones that are on that tropical milkweed. So they found that by using that one, which doesn't go deciduous, you are spreading a disease, a butterfly disease. So that's why not to use that one.
Now, yeah, what I had heard was cut it back
sorry, Anna,
in
I missed
winter.
The second question.
Somebody had asked if parsley, if you have personally experienced parsley attracting butterflies, if you have it in your garden.
No, I have not. But it's so hot here, you have to grow parsley in the winter. And you have to get on it early before it gets too cold or it doesn't grow. And often I'm distracted by other things and I don't get things done in time. So it could just be I can ask other people in our area though. I would ask around in your area and see if anybody's seen anything.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ellen, I think that's all of the questions. I'm going to give you a round of applause. Thank you so much. We've had a lot of comments from folks. And now we're going to have Diane from the library come on. But if you are still going to stick around after the talk, Ellen, and we have a few more questions, we can take those. But for now, let's have Diane take it away. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Anne. So yes, my name's Diane Bartlett, and I'm a librarian with Stanislaus County Library. I'm here just to share some tips for finding gardening books at the library. I want to start by saying, yes, we still have physical books and they are still available to you. At this time, we are offering curbside pickup. And as always, you can go online or have items put on hold for you to check out or give us a call. But there's an even easier way to borrow books from the library. You can check out ebooks with your Stanislaus County library card by downloading the Hoopla app to find books about butterflies in the garden. Simply go to your App Store or Play Store, wherever you get apps for your smartphone or tablet or even your computer, and look for Hoopla, download it, enter in your library card number, email, create a password, and you will have access to these electronic books. Other libraries also have access to Overdrive. We, as do other libraries, have access to Cloud Library. So for those of you outside of Stanislaus County, there may be other options for you. You can see on this slide the items that came up when I did a search for butterflies and garden. Next slide. So I've chosen a couple to tell you about specifically. Butterfly Gardening with Native Plants by Christopher Klein is a great title for all ages. There's a lot of information given in quick bits. He discusses butterfly gardening basics, common butterflies in the garden designs, guide to host plants, native nectar, and sources for native plants. I especially like the garden design section, the lists of butterflies with the brief but fact-filled segments, and the pictures, and the chart of host plans. And The Art of Butterfly Gardening by Matthew Tucholsky. This came out in 2015, as did the previous title. This is a complete step-by-step guide to gardening for butterflies. In here, you'll learn about the butterfly life cycle, habitats and behaviors, choosing and obtaining food and nectar sources, designing your garden, options for country, suburban, and city gardens. You'll find 50 common garden butterflies and the plants that they like, and butterfly observation and conservation information. It's got great illustrations and it's very clearly laid out. Next slide. So to get the most up-to-date information on library services and programs, including access to our catalog, please visit our library website at www.stanislauslibrary.org. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Next slide. You can always call your nearest branch for help in finding reading material, but you can also fill out our new reading recommendations form, and a librarian will contact you with reading recommendations, both fiction and nonfiction, and they're all set up just for you. Once again, thank you so much to the Master Gardeners for allowing us a little time to talk about the library, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Diane. I love that librarian recommendation. I'm going to try that because I always feel like I want to read more, but then I feel overwhelmed, like I don't know what I should read. So that sounds neat. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Diane. And thanks again, Ellen. I don't see any other questions, so I guess maybe there aren't too many more, but thank you again so much, Ellen. This was amazing. And to those of you on the call, we will be sending out a survey to you from the program in 3 months. It's a follow-up message. So if you'll just be sure to fill that out, that will be great. Otherwise, thank you all so much and have a great evening. Next month, we will be having a class on vermicomposting. That is composting with worms. And so that should be really cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.